How does that go? There's a lot of focus on interoperability in the NHS at the moment, and if I look at all of these acronyms and logos, they all have something to say, something to contribute to interoperability. How many people in my vast audience have heard of LOINC, by the way? This guy down here. Okay, but SNOMED CT. Okay, so LOINC is like an alternative, but they're all of these things contribute. They're all important, and they're all vying for attention and saying, I am the key critical factor. The truth of the matter is they all have a role to play, but it's all about your mindset. So I also hear people talking about interoperability, integration, and data sharing like they're the same thing. And they're not. They're not at all the same thing. Integration is a toolkit that lets you connect things together. Data sharing you can achieve if you've got one monolithic provider, one provider for your whole region. You can share data without any integration or any interoperability. Interoperability is a mindset that says, I'm going to follow the open path and have an open ecosystem. And if you allow yourself to not distinguish between the three things, you can end up in some messy thinking. You might think you've ended up with a solution, but it's not really a solution. Okay, so I'm going to say what on earth I mean by interoperability. Do that dialectic thing and define what I mean by interoperability. Interoperability means being able to take information from one healthcare system and share it in another information system, but do it in a meaningful way. So when it arrives, it actually carries meaning with it. It's not a puzzle for the user or for the next system, how it works. And that meaningfulness is the key. Plenty of technologies to do it, but that meaningfulness is the key. Anyone of my vast audience familiar with the radiology world, apart from you, sir, because I know you're familiar with the radiology world, okay? In the radiology world, people achieve interoperability without any of the FHIR standards or without any of the open air standards or any XDS. They do it with old-fashioned standards that come from the radiology world. They do it with HL7 and DICOM, the imaging standard. And they connect their radiology systems with electronic patient records, with portal applications, and they do it by let's say the dedication and the willful mindfulness of the radiology leaders who say, no, you will follow these open standards. You will make sure that when I buy a CT scanner, it can accept this right information from the scheduling system, and it will arrive on the CT scanner, and I'll be able to get the right patient and send that into the system. So that's a whole attitude of mind rather than the actual technology that's involved. Okay for radiology, but in the wider world we've got more things to consider than just passing around scheduled radiology appointments and radiology images. We have to think about the wider privacy and consent for the patient. We have to think about many more data types, and we have to think about whether we're going to try and aggregate the data together or whether we're going to federate across multiple different data sources. Lots of bigger challenges, but the same principles, I would say, exist. Okay, that it's more of a mindset than a technology. So in the interoperability world, I'd say there are three emerging technologies now which are most fashionably talked about. One of them is the IHE XDS. I'd say this is the most mature of the technologies. There's FHIR, which is definitely the favorite of NHS Digital. And then there's an emerging standard of Open EHR, which is, I could say, a groundswell of interest in the Open EHR. And I'm going to very quickly go through the key pros and cons of each of those methodologies before I come back to my main message. So with XDS, it's a network kind of technology. It allows you to integrate and work interoperability with many disparate systems to federate the information together through a central index. It has privacy and consent baked into the data model, so the network can carry with it into the different applications that use the network. It can carry with it the privacy and consent wishes of the patient. It's very practical. It's a document approach. They can deal with structured data and unstructured data like PDFs. And it has this kind of Google publish subscribe model. So that's a very established web model way of working. The cons, well, it's document based, so sometimes it can make it difficult to get to granular information like a specific blood pressure reading, for example. It's SOAP based, not RESTful. Well, that's quite. It's still a web-based API, but it's not the most modern API set that there is available. But it integrates with Fire. Fire is RESTful, and you can use Fire services on top of XDS. That's a really important thing to know. It's XML-based. Not everyone loves XML. And it doesn't seem to be the flavor of the month with NHS Digital and at the moment. Oops. I need training on the clicker. Fire. Okay, the pros and cons of Fire. So it's an information exchange protocol. It's very well adapted to making two electronic patient records talk to each other, opening up a single point-to-point connection. It's designed, the whole principle behind Fire, the whole design principles are that it's readable by human beings. That's the sort of mantra. Not necessarily something that's the same as saying readable by clinicians, I would say, by the way. It has some more detailed data modeling encapsulated within it, but it leaves that to the implementers to be able to implement the data models. And that's probably one of the main preoccupations now of NHS Digital as they try to define the data models they're going to use with Fire. Strong backing from NHS Digital. The cons of Fire are that the privacy and consent model is ambiguous. It's really down to the controls which are put in place by the applications that are using Fire to integrate with it. There's no central index, so you rely on your EHRs for your central index, and the workflow is not explicit within Fire. You rely on the applications that are using it to generate the workflow. Then OpenEHR. This is probably the youngest or the least used of the three standard approaches. It's a bottom-up data modeling approach, and the idea is that any application which has this shared common data model can share information. It's very strongly linked to clinical data modeling, and so you have to, on the cons side, you have to have a real appetite to want to make your own data model. And I'd say that's not something to take lightly. It's quite a detailed and quite a large undertaking. The international community for this is still young and still growing. And I'd say there's strong market resistance from big suppliers because this is the ultimate deconstruction of an electronic health record. So, back to my main point. I've talked a little bit about the pros and cons of each of those interoperability approaches. And actually, I think I'm going to go back to some of them and say, if you have a network-oriented mind where you think, you know, I want to federate the information across my region, then XDS is strongly the approach for you because that's going to give you the strongest chance to federate multiple different applications. If you have a EHR-focused mindset and you have multiple EHRs you want to connect together point to point, then Fire is a really strong option for you. And if you want to build your own electronic record from the ground up, OpenEHR is the kind of approach for you. Probably what will happen is you won't fall into one of those camps. Probably on a regional basis, you'll have people who have the appetite for all of them. And what's really good is all of these technologies will work together. They're all web-based. They all expose the information through APIs. They all have a way to respect security of access. And so with your interoperability mindset, adopting the open standards which are encapsulated by these standards approach, you can achieve real interoperability and serve all the different kinds of users in your region. So I wanted to, with this short presentation, bust the mythology that one kind of approach is the best approach and say a multiple approach is the best approach. And if you want to talk to me about it more, so some people taking pictures even of my presentation, I can get you a copy of the presentation if you like, and come and talk to me on stand 239.